Hey everyone, this is Tom from Energy Pricebook. One of the questions we often get from subscribers is, how long should we be monitoring energy pricing prior to the start of a coming supply contract? So we recently pulled together the needed data, conducted an analysis, and created this video to answer the question. So if you're an end user of power with sites in deregulated utilities or a broker consultant helping them, this video will hopefully give you some things to think about around monitoring. And here's the spoiler for those who want the answer now, although I'd encourage everyone to watch the full video. Over the last 5 years, if you were monitoring for less than a full 2 years prior to a coming contract's start month, you put yourself at a significant disadvantage regarding exposure to low energy pricing in the utilities included in our analysis. But this likely applies to most, if not all, deregulated U.S. utilities in recent years. So let's get started. Here's a quick overview of what we'll cover. I'll start by giving some background to our analysis, then we'll take a look at the data for each of the 3 utilities we analyzed, ComEd, PSEG, and Oncor, and we'll wrap it up with a short summary of the key points. So let's begin with the analysis background. I'll start by saying that Energy Pricebook has the unique ability to recreate the pricing history for any load profile, start month, and term length in the many utilities we cover. And that's what we did for this analysis. As mentioned, we focused on the energy subcomponent of supply power costs, since as many of you know, this is not only the largest cost component of supply, but also the only one you can truly influence the rate of through the timing of your buys. Specifically, we looked at the 2 years of energy pricing history leading up to the start month for a coming contract. In this way, we could see if, over the last 5 years, there was any advantage to monitoring price for a full 2 years before the start of a future contract term, or if a shorter monitoring period was just as good. For this analysis, we selected a standard office building profile, since this is a common load profile that's also familiar to most people. And we analyzed the 2 years of pricing history leading up to each of 4 start months per year over each of the last 5 years. So 20 total start months as shown by this graphic. Lastly, we analyzed the pricing history for 3 terms stemming from each start month, the common terms of 12, 24, and 36 months, just to see what difference term length introduced, if any, into results. And we performed this analysis in 3 popular and somewhat diverse utilities: ComEd, the utility for the Chicagoland area, PSEG in New Jersey, and Oncor, specifically the North Zone of Oncor, in and around the Dallas, Texas area. So let's take a look at a quick example to make sure all of this is clear. We'll use the first start month of the 5-year period, January 2019. As mentioned, for each start month, we analyzed the pricing history for 3 terms, 12, 24, and 36 months. And again, the pricing history we're analyzing is the prior 2 years leading up to the start month. So for a January 2019 start month, we looked at the energy pricing history from January 1st, 2017 up until the start month was entered. And we were specifically looking at how often price was within 10% of the low during this 2-year period. Finally, we wanted to see how often this occurred in 4 different monitoring windows, from 3 months prior to the start month, 6 months prior, 1 year prior, and the full 2 years prior to the start month. In this way, the data would tell us how likely it was in each of the prior 5 years that the lowest energy pricing seen in the 2 years leading up to a start month was occurring in each of the 4 monitoring windows, and thereby show us if there were any advantages to monitoring for longer periods, like 1 or 2 years, versus shorter periods like 3 or 6 months. Because let's face it, proper monitoring takes a bit of effort, especially if many facilities and utilities are involved. So if there's no significant advantage to longer monitoring periods, that would be good to know. Some other quick notes here prior to getting into the data. The last 5 years, 2019 through 2023, are a good period to analyze because of their variety. 2019, a pre-COVID year, was similar to many of the low volatility, low price years prior to it in many utilities. 2020 and 2021 were the COVID years with near zero interest rates, but also containing events like the February 2021 winter freeze in Texas. 2022 and 2023 were the COVID recovery years with interest rates ramping and a distinct increase in power market volatility. So if you believe that recent years are a better measure of the coming years than those prior to 2019, then this analysis should provide some food for thought, even if your buying patterns don't exactly match how we set things up here for the analysis, like those buying seasonal blocks of power or terms less than 12 months or profiles different than an office building, etc. Much of what you're ready to see here likely still applies. Also, and I'll mention this again shortly in the data section, as many of you know, proper monitoring is worthless without a set of buy rules. Buy rules that don't necessarily lock in the lowest pricing since no one has a crystal ball, but rather aim to limit upside price increases for a specific load. So let's look at some data. Here's the summary data for ComEd, the first of the three utilities we'll review. As you see, the data is summarized by year and consists of 6 columns. The first two display the high and low average prices recorded in dollars per kilowatt hour in the 2 years leading up to each of the start months included in each year. The next 4 columns show how frequently, on average, the buyer would have been exposed to low energy pricing if they were employing one of the 4 monitoring windows shown, from a full 2 years prior to the start month to only 3 months prior in the far right column. The values represent the number of weeks during the monitoring window indicated that contained at least one day where the energy price was at or within 10% of the 2-year low. For example, if you were monitoring for a full 2 years in ComEd for a coming contract with a start month in 2019, then on average, you would have been exposed to a low energy price as defined here in 55 weeks of the 105-week-long 2-year monitoring window. Likewise, if you were only monitoring for half that time, 1 year prior to the start month, then you would have seen a low energy price in 33 weeks of the 52-week-long 1-year monitoring period, and so on. These are the average values for all 3 terms, 12, 24, and 36 months, with the breakdown for each term below it. So here's the key data for ComEd regarding the last 5 years. If you look at this column for the 2-year monitoring window, the max monitoring window we analyzed, you'll see that you would have been exposed to low energy pricing a decent number of weeks in most years, other than 2023 where it really drops off. But notice how the other 3 shorter monitoring periods performed. All of them were decent in 2019 and 2020, meaning that there was no real advantage to monitoring for longer periods like 1 and 2 years versus shorter periods like 3 and 6 months. However, the difference is significant in the 3 years of 2021 through 2023. It's in these years where monitoring for less than the full 2-year window showed a significant drop in the amount of weeks in which a buyer was exposed to low pricing, so that even if a buyer was monitoring for a full year prior to the start month in 2022 and 2023, they were not exposed to any pricing within 10% of the 2-year low. At this point, you may be thinking, okay, Tom, I get it. In 2022 and 2023, all of the lowest pricing occurred over a year before all of the start months here in ComEd. But how would I have even known that the pricing I was seeing that far out was in fact the lowest pricing? And that's absolutely correct. But as previously mentioned, proper monitoring without a set of good buy rules is worthless. The purpose of monitoring is to expose you to low pricing and associated data that's actionable, i.e. detailed enough to make decisions. And the purpose of buy rules is to take that pricing information and decide if it meets the criteria for a buy. which doesn't guarantee that you're buying at a low, but does ensure the price is acceptable. Again, the best buy rules focus on limiting upside pricing risk rather than trying to pick or wait for a bottom. Think of buy rules as playing good defense. So now let's look at the same data for the PSEG utility. Here, I'll just point out the key data regarding the different monitoring windows. Notice how the drop-off in 1 year and shorter monitoring windows really only occurs in the final 2 years of 2022 and 2023, unlike ComEd where the drop-off began in 2021. If you want to review this PSEG data further, now would be a good time to pause the video before we move on to Oncor, the third utility analyzed. Here's the data for Oncor, specifically the North Zone. One thing you'll immediately notice is that there really weren't any good years for monitoring windows of 1 year and shorter over the last 5 years. For any of you with loads in Texas, this data isn't telling you anything new. Essentially, that forward energy prices in Texas have been rising or have remained steadily high for much of the last 5 years. This brings us to the summary. So let's quickly recap some of the main points. As shown from the last 5 years, monitoring energy pricing for at least 2 years prior to a start month significantly increases exposure to the lowest prices in most years. And this is especially true in Oncor and likely all Texas utilities. As mentioned already, proper monitoring, which increases your exposure to low pricing, is meaningless without a set of buy rules. In short, proper monitoring plus buy rules is the key to long-term success. To create this analysis, we had to get specific with the inputs to pricing. Similarly, proper monitoring has to be specific to the utility, load profile, start month, and desired terms for it to produce actionable pricing information. As you've seen by this analysis, even when using the same profile, start months, and terms, results can be measurably different in each utility. And lastly, monitoring, when done correctly, requires frequent attention and repricing of a load's specifics so opportunities aren't missed. In short, it's a process that begs for automation. So if you don't use EPB for this, you should find some other automated repricing and monitoring solution. This wraps up the video, so feel free to reach out to us with any questions or comments at our website, energypricebook.com, and stay tuned for other videos coming soon. Thanks.